In this nugget, we're going to go ahead and put a peer, an IPsec VPN peer that the Palo Alto firewall can play with, and then we'll verify that the IPsec is working. Let's begin. So for this nugget, our objective is to put R2 in place so that we have a peer that the Palo Alto firewall can peer with. And we really have several options. One is we could take two Palo Alto firewalls and simply replicate the details for IKE Phase 1 and IKE Phase 2 to build a site-to-site tunnel. Or we could use, for example, a Cisco router, which is what we're going to do in this nugget. Now, I realize I totally get it. This is a Palo Alto course. It's not a Cisco course. But for those of you who have interest in learning how to configure and manage and work with IPsec and various crypto protocols in a Cisco world, I would encourage you to check out the Cisco CCNA security course right here at CBT Nuggets. And for more details on cryptography and VPNs of many different flavors, I'd have you check out CCNP Security, specifically a course called SIMOS, which has the number of 300-209. And that course just goes crazy on VPNs. DM VPN, Flex VPN, Get VPN, you name it. So in this nugget, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you the configuration for the router, which implements all these same protocols and standards on a Cisco router, so we can go ahead and peer with the Palo Alto firewall. Now, just a couple of notes about our topology. Router 2, we're going to place him in GNS3 and logically place him on the 192.168.1 subnet. His IP address will be .2 on 192.168.1. And for the IPsec network, we're going to give it the IP address of 10.4.4, and R2 will have .2. The network at site 2 that R2 is representing here is going to be 10.5.5. And what we can do on R2 to make this easy to test is we'll just give R2 a loopback address of 10.5.5.2. We can enable web services, and that way, if we can have Bob the user go ahead and access 10.5.5.2 via HTTP, and if it's successful, or I should say, when it's successful, that traffic will go through the Palo Alto firewall, through the tunnel, to R2, and then R2 will respond to that IP address, as long as we've configured everything correctly. So I wanted to make sure we understand the gist, if you will, of this back end on R2 of what we're doing. And again, for more details on a Cisco implementation and their VPNs, please check out the CCNA security and respective CCNP security courses, which we have available for you right here at CBT Nuggets. So let's do this thing. We're going to bring GNS3 up. And in GNS3, let's go ahead and build a really easy topology. We're going to bring out a cloud that's going to represent the 192.168.1 subnet. We can right-click on that cloud, go to Configure, and for that cloud, I'll specify that the physical network interface card on this host that's running GNS3, that's what that cloud is going to represent. And that's how we added it right here. So effectively, the host is connected to 192.168.1, and now this cloud represents that network. So we'll click on OK. Next, let's bring out a generic switch, and then we'll bring out a router. And the router I want to bring out is a 7200 series, which has the support for IPsec. Then we'll connect it all together. I'm going to connect the R1 using FA00 to the switch, and from the switch, connect it over to the cloud, which represents the 192.168.1 network. We'll turn off the connector tool, and we'll click on play. Now, while that boots up, let me go ahead and bring up a console. I'll right-click on the router, and from the drop-down, I'll select console. Great. So there's R1 waiting for us, ready to go. And now that I've just done that, I also realize that that's one of the things we want to change. We don't actually want to call it R1, we want to call it R2, but we can fix that through the configuration. So here is the configuration. I've saved this document as part of your Nugget Lab file, so it's all there. And we're going to be using a virtual tunnel interface implementation of the IPsec on the Cisco router. So as a couple of highlights, we're going to go ahead and give it the host name of Site 2. We're going to bring Fast Ethernet 00 up and give it the IP address of 192.168.1.2. And we're going to create a loopback interface and give it the IP address of 10.5.5.2. Here we're enabling HTTP server services, and we're specifying the authentication. We'll use the local running config on this router, and we're creating a user called admin. That way when Bob hits this website and it asks him to authenticate, he'll be able to log in as admin if he knows the password. Which he does, by the way, because Bob is actually played by me. All right, let's scroll down a little bit further. Here's the details for the IKE Phase 1 policy, the encryption, the hashing, the authentication, Diffie-Hellman, and the lifetime. Here's the pre-shared key that we're going to use to authenticate the peer during IKE Phase 1. And here's our transform set that's going to specify the properties for the IKE Phase 2 tunnel, including the fact that we want to use AES 256 and SHA-1. We also have a profile object here on the Cisco router that's going to call on that transform set that we just created in the step above. It's going to set the PFS, perfect forward secrecy, to group 2. And it's also going to set the lifetime for the Ike Phase 2 tunnel to 10,000 seconds. Then here, we're creating a tunnel interface. Normally a tunnel interface is GRE on a Cisco router, but this little command says, forget that, it's an IPsec IPv4 tunnel. And on that tunnel interface, we've specified the 10442 as the IP address. We've specified the source where that tunnel begins is the IP address that's on the FA00 interface. And the destination of the tunnel is the IP address on the Palo Alto firewall. And then the tunnel protection IPsec profile command actually applies this profile to this tunnel interface. Then if we scroll down a little bit more, we have a static route that says, okay, to get to the 10.1.1 network, which is where Bob's computer is, the next hop is going to be 10.4.4.1, which is nothing. That's not the IP address we want to use. What we want to use, I'm going to change that right now. We want to use .250 because that is the tunnel interface address we assigned to the Palo Alto firewall. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now this is part of the Nugget Lab files, and we're just going to paste this in to the Cisco router to implement the configuration. So I'm going to take this entire config all the way from configure terminal, scrolling all the way down till the very bottom. The WR is a shortcut for saving the running config to the startup config. Let me right click on this, copy it, and we're going to paste this entire content into the router. So here at the router, we'll do a right click, and that, in my implementation of PuTTY that I'm using, that automatically does a paste. So that entire configuration has been pasted into that router. And the tunnel interface just came up, which by the way is a great sign. Since we're sitting here at the Cisco router, if we do a show crypto isocamp SA, press enter, that is fantabulous. In fact, if we do that command again and type in detail, it'll show us the details for this like phase 1 tunnel. So it's between the router R2 and the Palo Alto firewall. For Ike Phase 1, we're using AES, we're using SHA-256, pre-shared key, Diffie-Hellman 5, and based on when I did this command, we have that much time left, which equates to 50,000 seconds minus the time between when it came up and when I did this show command. Also, right here on the router, if we do a show crypto IPsec SA and press enter, that'll show us the Ike Phase 2 tunnel, the actual IPsec tunnel. Now this looks pretty healthy. Now it's not showing us that we have any packets that have been encapsulated and sent through, and that's because we don't have any traffic that's trying to go from the 10.1.1 subnet over to the 10.5.5 subnet. But you know what? You and I can fix that by going to Bob's PC right here. And on Bob's PC, we can go ahead and initiate a connection over to 10.5.5.2 via HTTP using a browser on Bob's computer. And if that works, that'll be another verification that the IPsec tunnel is working between the Palo Alto firewall and the remote site. So let's bring in Bob's computer. Here it is. And we'll log in as Bob. And let's open up a browser. And here in the browser, let's go to 10.5.5.2 and press enter. And look at that. This is Microsoft Edge, which is the browser for Windows 10. And it's saying, hey, the device, whatever it is, at 10.5.5.2 is asking you for a username and password. That's actually our Cisco router that we configured. So let's go ahead and type in the username of admin and the password of nugget, !23, and click on OK. And look at that. We are literally connected to that router via the VPN. So because that's working, if we went back to the graphical user interface, here at the dashboard on the Palo Alto firewall, we have some good telltale signs. Right here, it's indicating that Ike Phase 2 was successful, which is great. And if we clicked on the network tab and on the left-hand side went to IPsec tunnels, it also indicates right here that the status is a nice happy green. Also, if we clicked on the monitor tab and then on the left selected traffic and made sure we refresh this, so I've got a whole bunch of drops. It looks like some NetBIOS traffic going on. So if we want to scroll down a little bit and find some traffic for Bob regarding the VPN, check these out. So here's the source of 10.1.1.25. That's Bob's computer. It identified Bob as Bob. He was going to 10.5.5.2 on port 80. The application it saw as was web browsing, and it was allowed due to the rule called VPN users. Another really cool feature is this. Let's say we wanted to find anywhere the source shows up. We could click on this one time. So I'm going to click on 10.1.1.25 as the source. And what that did, it put it right up here in the filter for me. So if we click on this little green go arrow right here, it'll show us anywhere in our traffic logs where the source address is 10.1.1.25. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Go arrow to apply the filter. So now I'm looking at all the traffic that's simply sourced from 10.1.1.25. Now, if we wanted to filter that down even more, for example, taking a look at just the traffic logs for the source IP address of 10.1.1.25 going to, let's say, 10.5.5.2. That was Bob going to that web server. There's a few ways of sorting that out, but one way is to find an entry like that. For example, I'm just going to scroll down and then clicking on the destination of 10.5.5.2, and check this out. It adds it as part of our filter. So now we can actually click on the Go icon and it'll actually apply that filter. So I'm going to do that. And this is now going to show us, once it refreshes, only log entries that are from 10.1.1.25 going to 10.5.5.2. And then if you want to clear those filters, we just use a little X up here to clear the filters, and then it's going to show us everything once again. In this nugget, we verified the IPsec site-to-site tunnel by having a little fun with GNS3 and a Cisco router as the far end side of the IPsec tunnel. And by doing so, we could validate the tunnel was working. We could also take a look at the logs and messages on the Palo Alto firewall that confirmed the IPsec tunnel was functioning. I'd also like to remind you that the Nugget Lab files that you can download from cbtnuggets.com also include each and every command that I just implemented on R2, the router, for the purpose of testing the IPsec site-to-site tunnel. So please take advantage of those if you'd like to use them. So I'm grateful you joined me for this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.